a long time ago, too long for me to really dwell on, I used to be a classroom teacher, and I spent sort of 15 years as a classroom teacher, first as a science teacher, and then as a technology teacher, and I finished up sort of being the head of a faculty of science and design, which is quite an interesting combination. Now I moved into teacher education, and then I was lucky enough to get the job as the project director for the Nuffield Foundation of their design and technology project. And I spent quite a long time doing that. I spent a lot of time working with teachers, and I'm really delighted to actually be with so many teachers and people who are responsible for teacher education. Your title, Head of the Department of Teacher Empowerment, what a great title for a job, empowering teachers. I think that's really, really tremendous. And so I want to talk about this idea of disruption and how we can develop in young people some sort of perspective on technology that helps them think about that in a positive way. That's my email address, and I'm more than happy for you to email me if you want to. I've got a website which I share with a colleague, Torben Stee. That's the address to that. And if you've really got nothing to do, you can follow me on Twitter.
Are we getting this presentation?
You'll get this presentation, yeah. Here's the overview. I want to think a little bit about the nature of the subjects we teach in schools. In England it's called design and technology. Sometimes in other countries it's just called technology. And that's not to be confused with teaching computer programming. I think they're quite different things. I want to identify, if we can, the features of disruption. What makes a particular technology disruptive as opposed to just new and innovative? I want to look at the disruptive technologies we might teach children about in schools, what I think are particularly relevant to them and also capable of being taught. Because it's not much good, it seems to me, coming up with this great long list of things, and then we actually find only half a dozen we can actually do in school. I want to think about how we sort of actually teach about those disruptive technologies. And then I want you to have a go at developing and exploring scenarios for how technologies might play out, right? So that you get do some of the sort of thinking that David Wood was asking you to think about earlier in the session. Then I've got a couple of tasks related to these things. It'll be time for you to do those tasks in groups, so I stop doing all the work and you start doing some work. Then we'll have, when we've spent some time on those tasks, you'll have to do some presentations to the rest of the group. Then there'll be some summing up, and then I think we need to think about what we might want to do next with what we're learning about disruptive technologies. Okay, so that's my overview for the day. So we'll start with the nature of design and technology. And I want to talk about the justifications for teaching it. I want to think about the difference between perspective and capability, because I don't think they're the same thing, though they're related. And I want to think about what are the big, what we might call enduring ideas that are in the subject design technology. I've just got 6 ideas that I think are really important. Okay? And one of the reasons I think this is important is that just over a year ago, there was a danger in England of design and technology being removed from our national curriculum. Right? And the reason that the experts gave was that they couldn't, they said the subject had weak epistemological roots. No one could really explain to them what the subject was about. Now we argued against that.
Technology?
Yeah. What I've found is, talking to teachers, if I said to you, I want you to each give me the 6 big ideas in technology, I wonder how many answers would be the same. Because what we found in both England and Australia, when you put technology teachers in a room and you say, now what are the big things you've got to teach? 2 days later, the technology teachers are still arguing about what are the big ideas. We don't seem to have an orthodoxy, and one of our jobs over the past year in England has been to establish the orthodoxy of what are the key big ideas. So, let's start with why we want to teach this. And I've got sort of 4 reasons. Now, we're going to need technicians, designers and engineers in the future. Yeah? That's pretty true, isn't it? True. Is that the main reason why we teach design and technology or technology in schools? Right? I just asked that question. No? It's going to be useful to everybody in later life to some extent. So that's a good reason to teach it. It will help us with the big decisions we've got to make. We've talked a little bit about this morning, haven't we? And there's this one. It's part of what makes us human. So my question to you is, which is they're all kind of sort of reasons, aren't they? Which is the best reason?
The last one. The last one.
I'm so glad you said that. We're on the same page. And if you talk to art teachers or history teachers or science teachers, they want to teach art or history or science because this is a very important part of what humans are like and what humans do. And I think particularly if we just pin our colours to this mast, you know, most of the children we teach won't become technicians, designers and engineers, right? So, you know, that's not a good reason for teaching it to all children. It's probably going to be useful. I think that starts to become a much better reason. Certainly this is important. But the really big reason for me is what I see as the cultural reason. It's cultural significance, because it's part of a big picture, what I call the cultural justification. Envisaging what might exist in the future and using tools and materials to create that future is a unique human ability which has led to the development of successive civilizations across history. Yeah? You would disagree with that, would you?
No.
Right, okay. It embodies some of the best of what it means to be human. It also actually embodies some of the worst as well. We study D&T, or design technology, because it introduces learners to that field of human endeavour. Right? It's a big part of what it means to be human, and part of what we do in school is to educate people as opposed to just train them. Yeah? I think that's a really important distinction, and it empowers them to become people who see the world as a place of opportunity where they and others, through their own thoughts and actions, can improve their situation. Now that seems to me to be the big reason, this idea of thinking things up and bringing them into reality by using tools, materials. And I wish it had been me that had written that, but it wasn't. It was a man called Jacob Bronowski, who was a very famous thinker from the 60s and 70s in England, and he wrote this brilliant book called The Ascent of Man. We wouldn't call it The Ascent of Man now, we'd call it The Ascent of Humanity. I take that to account because there's so many sort of women in the room, but at that time that sort of title was okay. It wouldn't be okay now. And it was turned into a really good TV programme. And I think both the TV programme and the book are available on Amazon. And it charts the history, human history, through a technological lens from, you know, the Stone Age right the way through up to about 1960. And he's got another brilliant phrase: the hand is the cutting edge of the mind. You know, the first tool that we came across and were able to use, that's what started it all off, right? And I think, you know, that is a very, very important dimension of why we teach technology. It's culturally significant, and we try and give young people this capability in using tools and materials for themselves. But I think that's only half the story. I think the other half is technological perspective. And you've got this young person there thinking, how might my world change in the future? And that was the question we were asking first thing this morning, wasn't it? And I think that's something which we in technology education have to engage with, helping young people think about their future, you know, with technological glasses on, developing a technological perspective. So it's just not about can do, it's also about can think with regard to what we're doing and why, both individually and on a wider society level. So what would our enduring ideas be? If you had to come up with 6 big ideas, what would you come up with? No one's catching my eye at this point, everybody's looking somewhere else. Okay. Well, What do you think about these? I think the first one is to do with the nature of the subject. This idea that through using tools, materials and our imagination, we can create new things that ideally are an improvement for our situation. I think that's very different to what scientists do. You often hear people talk about science and technology almost as if they're one word. I think science is really about exploring and explaining and predicting. I don't think it's necessarily about trying to create new stuff to improve the human condition. Clearly you use what scientists find out to help you do that, but it's not the prime objective of the scientific endeavour. And I think one of the things that has gone wrong in some schools is that when the scientists and the technologists have tried to work together, that fundamental nature of the two subjects has become confused. And what I think often happens is the fact the scientists try and subvert the technology to teach science as opposed to teach technology. Have you come across this at all? The scientists sort of, they say we're going to do this because it teaches kids lots of science. And I'm saying I'm really pleased it teaches them lots of science, but does it teach them lots of technology, right? Because they're different. And we've got to, it's not that one's right and one's wrong, they're both important, but some of the work that I've been involved with, because science is so powerful in the curriculum, it's so well established, it tends to dominate the science-technology relationship if we're not careful. Right? So we've got to be clear about our fundamental nature, and that I think goes back to Bronowski and his point of the cutting edge of the mind, using tools and materials to create a better place for us to be. Now if we're going to do that, it seems to me, we start to go around here. We need to know something about materials, yeah? You can't imagine being a technologist and not knowing something about materials. You could imagine being a software engineer, perhaps, and not knowing something too much about materials, but ultimately what your software engineering did would end up being turned into something that had to use materials. So I think materials are important, but it's not just the properties of materials. What else might we want to know about materials other than just what they're like?
What can we do?
Well, what we can do with them, and that's got something to do with their properties, right?
Availability, cost.
Cost to be available, whether it's available. Okay. What do you mean? Just financial cost or other stuff?
Yeah, I did, but environmental cost would be.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me the footprint of a material, what we take out, what it costs us in terms of the environment to get it to where we can use it is important.
Side effects.
Sorry?
Side effects.
And you might want to know something about the side effects of the material. You also might want to know a little bit about how much of it we've got left if it's a finite resource, right? Mm-hmm. Okay? So it seems to me it's not just, if you like, the sciencey bit that we need to understand and what it's like, and the scientists can investigate materials and tell us its properties and what we like to be able to do with it, but we need to know something about its economics cost, its environmental cost, its footprint, that's its investment, and also its longevity, how much is there left. So it's more than just the science.
But besides of the economic issue, all the other feature is chemistry and biology. So what is the
distinction?
Yes, of this.
What is the other stuff that's chemistry and biology? Oh, tell me a bit more about that.
The feature of the material, it's a chemistry.
Yep.
Okay, and the cycle of the material, it's kind of biology, ecology. You left only the economic issue
Well,
and the technology.
yeah, we could, well, I think we have to take them all into account, don't we? When I'm choosing a material to use, I can say, well, actually, this bit of information about that material, I can think of that as its biology or its chemistry, but I've still got to take it into account, haven't I? It's not just what the material is like as what its properties are. What I'm trying to say is the decision to use a material is complex, and we have to know something about it. Right? And some of that knowledge comes from science. You're right on that. I wouldn't have framed it the way you had, but I guess you're a science teacher, so you do it. That's okay. We could agree on that. What about manufacturing? Do we need to know something about manufacturing?
Yes.
Yeah, of course we do, right? Now, if you had to describe manufacturing, how would you do it? What are the sort of big ideas in manufacturing? What do kids need to know generally about the way to make stuff?
Process.
They know it's a process, so which processes are important? Big ideas.
Creating something.
Well, creating's kind of what...
Design.
Well, no, that's down here. Right? I'm just talking about how we take
Taking the material.
the material and turn it
into something.
into something different. What are the techniques that we use? Big ideas.
Machine.
We use machines, and what do those machines do? Big ideas. Right up. Sorry?
Change the form.
You can change the form, couldn't you? So you can sort of melt and cast that. So I'm going to call that forming, right? How else can we change the shape of material?
Hands.
We can use our hands to do that, and we could form some materials, but most materials, it's quite hard to use our hands on. Right? What about...
Size.
Well, you're going to change the size, aren't you? And what's the way of changing the size of materials? I can sort it up, or file it, and I'm going to call that subtraction. So I can take it and I can take bits away. Yeah,
Okay.
I can form it, I can subtract, I can add it together in layers. Remember the 3D printing? So I can add, I can subtract, I can form, and then I can construct. Right? I can take those various bits and I can join them together in different ways. Right? So I've got adding, subtracting, forming, constructing, 4 big ideas, and sometimes I need to protect or finish. Right? So I'd say they were the 5 big ideas. Who are technology teachers here? Teach kids to make things. Just 2, 3. Do you teach your 11-year-old children about addition, subtraction, forming, finishing, construction with those ideas?
In some way,
No, but as those as big ideas.
I'm not sure if we expose the...
But I bet you teach them about sawing and filing and drilling and milling and turning.
I didn't hear you.
Sorry, I what I'm suggesting is that we teach the particular individual techniques, but we don't give the big picture, right? Because I've talked to some teachers in England about this, and they say, oh, I teach to my 18-year-olds about those big ideas. My question is, why don't we teach those big ideas to 11-year-olds? Because they're not that hard, are they, right? Mm-hmm. And you could have a conversation with a child and say, are you subtracting or adding there? And they would be able to answer it. Whatever tool they're using, they should be able to see a bigger picture of making. And sometimes the making is mechanised, sometimes it's mechanised and computer controlled, but we'll still be adding, subtracting, forming or constructing.
You can do it even with small children. You play Lego for.
Well, that's right. I mean, you could go with much younger children. I was, but those are the big ideas. What about functionality? Why is that important?
Because you can use.
We want things to be usable. We want things to work, don't we? We don't want just to sit there. And I think for functionality, you've got sort of 3 things. One is it has to be structurally sound, to be stable, rigid if necessary, stiff enough, strong enough, those sorts of things. I think you also need to know something about how you might power things. What are your power and energy sources? And you need to know something about control. And that's particularly where computing comes in and the ideas of computer control. But there's also mechanical control and electrical control. So I've got 3 big ideas there. Power, control and structure. Huh? I think we've already mentioned this word, You can take your understanding of materials, manufacture, and what you want things to be able to do, and use design to create things that do what you want to do. How many people teach design? Because that's the one that's really hard, it seems to me. You can teach people about materials, you can teach them to make things, you can teach them about energy sources and batteries and solar energy, that kind of thing. But getting people to have ideas where they... It's creating those ideas. And it seems to me that designing and the sorts of things that technologists are designing for our future now is really important, and we want to get young people thinking about that designing as well. Okay? And then this last one, critique, being able to stand, and that's where I think the perspective comes in really well, where you stand back and you look at what's going on and you say, we can, but should we? And we look, and I think there are two sort of perspectives. One, I want to look at technologies and say, is what this technology is achieving increasing justice or decreasing justice? I think justice is very important. And will this technology enhance our stewardship of the planet, or will it reduce our stewardship of the planet?
Don't you start with this?
Well, I think you could. I'm not saying you need to start anywhere in here. I mean, you can choose as a teacher where you start. You could say, we're going to look at what's going on in the world, and is it just? Are we being good stewards with regard to the technologies at our disposal? And I think that would be a great place to start, right, with a perspective. But some people would say, no, we've got to get kids hands-on, we've got to get them using materials and making. But I think you have to think about what you're making in terms of a critique. And I think there's two levels of critique. Often you hear in design people be talking about evaluation. We want to evaluate it. And it seems to me often when you evaluate it as whether it is fit for purpose. Does it do what it was supposed to do? Does it meet the design requirements? And that's important to do that. But I think sometimes we have to stand back a little bit further and say, should we be producing things that do that sort of thing? You know, there's this people say, does it do what it says on the tin? Stand back. Should we be doing what it says on the tin? Okay. Both are important. And we spent hours and hours and hours arguing with people about what were the big ideas, and that's what we came up with. Now, what do you think of them? Would you sign up to those, generally? If I missed anything big out?
The economy.
Well, I think the economy comes in when we think about materials and where they come from. You could have the economy coming in means of manufacture. You could have the economy coming quite a lot under critique, particularly in terms of stewardship, but also justice. So I think economy is kind of one of these things that wriggles around. I think you could have politics wriggling around quite a lot in there in terms of how and when decisions are made.
Why not separate the...
You want. The difficulty I think with that is if you get many more than 6, right? You start getting 8 or 10 or 12, it then starts to become too complicated for people to handle, right? But I think it's an interesting point. But I just wonder, going back to my first question, if I'd asked you to give me 6 big ideas, what would you have come up with? It's interesting, we've only got 2 technology teachers. How many science teachers have we got? Hands up, let's see all the science teachers. Don't be ashamed, it's okay to be a science teacher. You're science, okay? How many maths teachers?
I'm wrong.
We're both,
Because
okay.
it's middle school science.
Okay, so we've got maths, science, not how many computing teachers? Yeah, right, okay. Computing as well, so you're polyfunctional. But not that many people who teach would see themselves as a technology teacher. Right? So this is I guess sort of new territory for you. But I think it's important that when you meet with your technology colleagues, you do have this discussion about what are the big ideas that they're trying to teach. Okay? Because it's often what people see when they go into a technology class is they see children making things, right? And they think it's just about that. not about all these other things. Yeah? You can share it.
This change, the change of the position of the technology discipline is all around all around the world in the education. So
Well, you're saying that people are kind of, is it high status or is it becoming a lower status? Or is there still, are there just questions about it?
It's everywhere.
it's everywhere.
Low and high.
I mean, what I found is it varies from place to place, almost from school to school. Some schools it's got a very high status, and others it's got a very low status. And so its status varies in different ministries too. I mean, our Ministry of Education had a very low opinion of it, but our Ministry of, what was called the Ministry of Trade and Industry, they had quite a high opinion of it. So, you know, it's quite difficult to get a grip on it, I think.
What's in the curriculum of this program? What?
What, that one?
No. These are the main ideas.
I think the use of the word technology as a subject means different things.
Yeah, well, that's what I wanted to.
So is that what you're saying? Something what in the UK, for example, what does this curriculum? What sort of like metalwork, food technology?
Well, you see, we stopped doing metalwork for a long time. Stopped doing metalwork and woodwork in 1989. Right? But there are, at the moment, people who do food technology, textile technology. But the movement is to just do technology, not to specialise in a particular material. And that's going to be interesting to see whether that works. And that's where you need these big ideas.
When I was, let's say, middle school,
Yeah.
I had lessons in working with woods.
Yeah.
So I knew about the material. I have to design. I have to criticize myself what I'm doing, how I plan. But now I think I have also a lesson with sewing.
Yeah.
So I have to choose the material, which one, what I. But there's no lesson like that today. Today they study computer, let's say, computer.
Well, I think it depends where you go, because I think I would see studying computing as perhaps a little part in this of looking at control, right? But I would see people doing work with wood and fabric, you know, in these two parts.
And criticize and design.
Yeah. But I think what we're trying to move to a situation is where people look at a situation and say, I want to design this sort of thing. What materials would be the best ones to use, rather than saying you're going to make it in wood, you're going to do it in textile. So, for example, if you decided you were interested in kites, you were going to get involved in kites, it would not just involve fabric, it would almost certainly involve wood and plastic as well, wouldn't it? So.
But does it have to include the computers?
Well, I think I would see computers as a tool of varying levels. I would see, one, you can use computers to help you design things. You can use computers to help you manufacture, because you can have computer-aided design and manufacture. And I think I would want to see computers being used in developing control. And you're going to have a go, I think, at programming little Arduino circuits, which will then control things. And you'll use the computer to program the Arduino chip. So I see computers in here, but only as tools to use in varying places, rather than being a big thing on their own. But there is another subject called computer science in our curriculum, and it's just that we've taken some parts of that subject and put them in here. And ideally, you want the computer science teachers to work with the technology teachers to make sure, you know, they were teaching the same approaches. Okay. Let's think about disruption now, because I just wanted to give you that kind of picture of what might be going on in technology classes. McKinsey, who are, they say, well, what disruption does, it disrupts the status quo, and they've got quite a clear definition of that. They say it will overturn existing hierarchies and may lead to, or not, to different hierarchies, which might be more democratic or they might not. So you can see in the slides that David showed, that one of the hierarchies they overturned was the horse-drawn vehicle market. If you, in the late 1800s, had a lot of money invested in horses and trading horses, you were doing very, very well. And all of a sudden, the motor car comes along, and that hierarchy is completely disrupted and overturned. And you don't actually have a business anymore, and you've gone broke. So disrupting the state, alter the way people live and work, rearrange value pools so that some things become, start to become much more valuable than others, leading to entirely new products and services. So when we're looking at a technology, we can use these as touchstones as to how the disruption takes place. Now, which technologies will be disruptive? And these are the lists that McKinsey came up with. The mobile internet, the automation of knowledge work. We saw quite a lot of automation of knowledge work in that last clip of those. The Internet of Things, cloud technology, advanced robotics, self-driving cars, autonomous and near-autonomous vehicles, next generation genomics, energy storage, 3D printing, advanced materials, advanced oil and gas exploration and recovery, something to do with energy. Now that's, David Wood and I didn't share our slides before we came on here, but that seems to me to be pretty much like the list that he was coming up with, isn't it? And it's not just McKinsey, renewable energy, not just McKinsey. David Willett, who was until fairly recently our Minister for Science in this country, he came up with big data and energy efficient computing, stuff to do with satellites and space, robotics, life science and synthetic biology, regenerative medicine, agricultural science, advanced materials and nanotech, and finally energy and its storage. So you've got two quite independent sources coming up with lists that are quite similar. Yeah? And what I and some colleagues thought was, what will we do in school? And this was the list we came up with. Additive manufacturing, and you're going to be doing some work on additive manufacturing, I think. Artificial intelligence, augmented reality, big data, intelligent matter, the Internet of Things, neurotechnology, robotics, and synthetic biology. And the people who've come up with that is me, right on the right, my colleague Torben Stieg, and another colleague called Nick Gibbons. Nick trains technology teachers at Exeter University, and Torben used to train technology teachers at Manchester University. And we've gone for these because we think they're, as far as children are concerned, they're salient, in that this is what experts elsewhere think like important. Children will probably find these intriguing and entertaining. Right? Those are our reasons for coming up with those 9.
Just wonder if everybody understands the language.
Yeah. Anybody want any clarification?
Intelligent matter.
Well, that's that sort of matter that kind of can be programmed to behave in a particular way.
Smart materials.
Smart materials is an extension of smart materials. I mean, the people at MIT have got materials that they can program. When they put an electric current in it, it folds up like origami into particular shapes.
Neurotechnology.
And neurotechnology is this to do with the way the brain works, and we now know that we can actually put devices on people's heads, get them to think, and get things to happen at a distance in computers and in machines.
Augmented
No, that's Google Glass. So when you look at things something through Google glasses, I don't know, if I look at my friend here, and my computer back up in the cloud knows something about you, that will come up in my Google Glass about you, right? Or if I'm in a particular place, it'll tell me what other places are near to it. That kind of thing. Right? And I mean, I've heard teachers talk about that. Well, kids could have a Google Glass on, and they look at the pillar drill, and up come the instructions in how to use the pillar drill. And that's just around the corner. The trouble is, you look terrible. I went to a lecture by somebody, very, very fierce young woman, and she was very anti-Google Glass, and she put these pictures of these chaps wearing Google glasses on, and she said this in a rather rude way, she said, who'd want to make love to any of them, right? Just because they look so good, geeky. But I mean, clearly that is going to be with us very, very shortly. You okay on big data, all this huge amount of information that people at Amazon, Google, Facebook have about us and could use? And the question is, you know, how do we teach that in schools?
When do you want to teach that?
Well, that's the question, Darren. When do you teach it? I mean, some of the ideas I've been talking about.
Which level?
Which level? Well, I don't know. I mean, how old would the children need to be for you to teach about some of these things? Could you teach some of this in the primary school, elementary school? I think you could certainly teach robotics in the elementary school. Whether you teach about it as a disruptive technology or not, interesting. But I mean, in terms of the Internet of Things, most children in primary schools now, as they get older, will have a mobile phone which is part of the Internet of Things. And maybe we need to get them to think about their mobile phone as part of the Internet of Things and a place where they can call up big data. Now, the way you do it with young children will be very, say why I'm doing it with 9-year-olds, you'd revisit this and do it in a different way when they were 13 and revisit it and do it in a different way when they were 16, wouldn't you?
Yes, but after you have to replace by something. You have to teach something to replace by that.
Why do you mean you have to teach something to replace?
How to say it in English? You have to replace another.
Oh, you have to. Yes, you've only got a certain amount of time in the curriculum.
Yes.
If you put this in, something has to go.
Something has to go.
Right. Well, that's the challenge, isn't it? Because we're always trying to get a quart into a pint pot, aren't we? We've got too much for into the time, and we have to make judgments as to what we think is important. Sometimes the government makes those judgments for us, yeah. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes they leave it to us to decide what's in the curriculum. I mean, how many people are in places where they've got real control over what they teach? Or are most of you in a position where the government sort of says, this is what you've got to teach? Or the local authority, or somebody other than you? Most of you are in that position where you're kind of, what you teach is defined. I mean, I think that's the case in most countries. The interesting thing is how can you influence people that make that decision to put in the curriculum what you think is important, isn't it?
We have no?
Do we have to change the meaning of teaches?
Yeah.
Do we have to change the meaning of...
Teaching.
Oh, well, yeah,
The
we
meaning,
might,
not
but we
the word,
might,
the
well,
meaning,
what does this word actually mean? Yeah, I think you might well have to, yeah, we're going to get
We
on
have
to
to
that.
change the meaning of
What it means to be a teacher.
Because what's in the past meaning of the teach? You have to think about the early knowledge that have to be to the students. And here I don't know how to list the early knowledge.
Right, okay, fine. So, because some of this is very new, right, you as a teacher might not have all that much knowledge about it. And the question is, what knowledge do you need to have in order to be able to introduce the children to it so they can find out more, I would say, you know, particularly with regard to this technological perspective, right?
What is amazing is that
You mean-
kids know more than us, actually. They teach us
Absolutely.
teachers because they taught me about robotics,
Yeah.
about the augmented reality. They are coming
Yeah.
in school to teach me. So actually I realized that we have to teach them since they are small. That is, this has to become their curriculum.
But I think we should always take into account what the young people themselves know, because they always surprise me as to just how much they do know, and they sometimes know. I mean, sometimes I know stuff that they don't, but often they know stuff that I don't. You know, almost about the same thing, and it's complementary. What we're probably better at is helping them think about it, rather than.
You mean to teach them this systematically?
Well, I think you might want to try and teach
Because
them.
I think along our teaching, we use these things. We are not calling them name and we don't speak systematically, but as a biology teacher, I'm sure I'm talking about synthetic biology.
Yeah,
I'm
cool.
sure about
Nanotechnology.
yeah, so
Well, I
we
think
don't
that-
call it names, we don't make him it's a special program,
Ah.
but we do use it.
Right, well let's just
You
go on to my
mentioned
next slide,
rather
because you've brought this up really rather nicely. Which subjects should teach them, right? Now I would have thought the technology teacher is likely to be teaching this sort of thing in the secondary school, right? Okay. The science teacher would almost certainly be doing the neurotech and the synthetic biology. The computing teacher is likely to be teaching those sorts of things. And what I've missed out is the maths teacher. So where's the maths teacher? What would it? Do you teach any of this in math?
No, I don't teach neurotechnology or no biology. But in kind of like Raya said, we teach algorithms.
We teach algorithms. So,
So
you
it's
would, you would probably be
Even
in this sort of,
even robotics.
in robotics. And then
In technology and computing, there is a lot of, we need a math very much.
Yeah.
And in technology and computing, I don't know about science.
Of course there is mathematics.
So I think math is everywhere. We need it
well, you see,
very much.
what I was wondering was, what about STEM in this? Whether in fact some of these things could be taught by these teachers collaborating together rather than teaching them on their, teaching them within their separate disciplines. I thought your point was a good one. Do we need to systematise it? We can talk about synthetic biology. We can talk about that from a science point of view, or we can try and teach it about a disruptive technology point of view. How is it going to affect our lives in the future? Now, you might be doing that already, and I suspect that in many science courses, this is going to start to become more and more important as it becomes more and more important in everyday life. And one of the things that science curriculum is starting to do is look at the sort of science and society issues. Is that reasonable? Are you doing that?
I don't know. When I'm teaching, and if it's part of what I'm teaching, and if it make what I'm teaching more interesting, I will get into it. If the student will cooperate with me, and it will be a discussion in the classroom, I think it's worth it.
Oh, absolutely. But
I'm not gonna make a test about it.
Gosh, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? How the structure of the assessment might govern what you teach. So it seemed to me that it would be worth teaching that, whether there was a test about it or not. Right? The difficulty is finding time to teach about things when there isn't a test. Yeah. So one of the things I'd be arguing for is, if it's important, then maybe we should be testing it, right? But I can see that what you don't want to do is to spoil it by having a test.
To me,
Right?
if it's interesting, and I got like many of the students in the class are involved in the discussion, I say, yeah, I made it.
Good. Yeah. I mean, I don't think anyone would disagree with you in that, but I do think that when we've got curricula that are tested,
systematically
You should.
test it. You should.
you should. Yeah. Well, I think there is an argument for testing it, but exactly what you test, we might need to unpack that a bit. Sorry.
I return to my for you divided the technologic in a different discipline.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are as a science teacher, we should teach the technologic in our curriculum.
Right.
But it's influence the assessing of the issues. So if we will teach technology side by side with science or computer, or it will be okay because we will see the whole picture. We have the basic of the science or the computer, and by side this will teach and test the second of the teaching.
Yeah, I can see that. Do you have separate technology lessons in your curriculum? Or does everybody kind of
In
teach
this
something?
one, there is the second.
It's there as a subject as well. Is it?
Yeah.
But you would say, as a science teacher, there are aspects of technology which you would want to teach.
I have no knowledge and I don't test the children.
Ah, right. but you would still feel it'd be worth you teaching, yeah?
Like I said, I will mention the subject, but not. I don't have the knowledge, and I don't think that is correct to teach it in science.
Well, I mean, this is where we're getting. This is where it gets really interesting. Who's going to be responsible for teaching this technological perspective that gets young people to understand about disruptive technologies and their nature, right? Because you and your schools have to decide that. I'm just laying out what I think is the materials in the curriculum, the knowledge and understanding that's needed. But I don't necessarily. I mean, I'm not saying you've got to teach it, but it seems to me it's important that somebody teaches it, and probably it would seem to me collaboration between teachers makes it better. And maybe you have these things like STEM days. You have things where you collapse the timetable for a whole day and just do STEM activities, because that's quite popular in this country. You could imagine having a disruptive technology day where 4 teachers worked with, I don't know, 100 children just on the idea of disruptive technologies, for example.
Question. But what we put into the notion of teach? What I could teach big data, to protect big data, to organize big data, to deal with big data. What is
Well, that is an interesting question, and one which I'm going to want you to sort of think about. I mean, you can give people examples of big data. You can give them big data sets to play with. You can actually look at what other people are doing with big data. What does Amazon and Facebook do with your data? You know, how does the government use all the data it's got, for example, in terms of healthcare? So you can get children to look at those questions.
Well, it's more discussion.
Oh, it's a lot of it. I mean, it's not necessarily. A lot of it is discussion work. Yeah. It's not. You know, I'm going to show you particularly how to do this. I want you to explore this area and try and find out more about it and come to some sort of judgment as to what you think ought to be being done. So it's quite tricky territory for teachers. If I go on to the teaching methods which we use in design and technology, we've kind of got 4 main ones. One is you can make things without design. Now it seems to me you could get children to make things that were related to a disruptive technology. I mean, some schools, when 3D printers started to come out, they brought a 3D printer kit and the children made the 3D printer. Right? I think that's quite an extreme example. But you could imagine making without designing. I think what's quite interesting is designing without making, where you could say to young people, okay, we've got this new technology, we've got these new smart materials, what would you do with them? Okay. And then whether what they do with them is is worthwhile or not, that's the matter for discussion. We could try and design and make something, or we could run sessions which are to do with exploring technology in society, which is what I think you were kind of moving towards. Now, I'm not saying you've got to use any of these methods, but that's the way technology is taught in most schools in England. We spend some time on those 2, quite a lot of time on that one, and probably not enough time on this one, in terms of exploring technology, in terms of understanding the way technology works. So your task to start off with, or one, we're not going to do it straight away, working in groups, I want you to think about a student activity, and it could be a group activity, not just a single student. And you could think about each of these, or something else, if it takes your fancy, to teach about one of the technologies. So when you get into groups, you say, well, actually, I think I want to teach children about the Internet of Things. How will I teach them? Will I get them to design something but not make? I suspect designing and making probably wouldn't work, so I'm going to put a cross by that. But I could get them to explore how the Internet of Things is also being used. Right? Because certainly now with your smartphone, certainly in this country, you can control your central heating. Don't you? Right? Now, do children know about that?
Yeah.
They would, yeah. And I think it's worth, you know. And what are the problems with that? What happens if I've got my smartphone and controlling my central heating, and my wife's got her smartphone? She wants the house hot, and I want the house cold. You know, and what happens then? What happens if someone malicious hacks into my mobile phone and unlocks all the doors? Because you can lock and unlock your doors with your mobile phone. Right? So there's some quite interesting sort of discussions to be had, I think, about these things. Yeah? So that's a task for you in groups in a little while. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to give me a quick 2 minutes on what your group thinks. So if we go for groups of 4, I'm just doing some
Instrument for teaching. First, to make some robots. For example, all students should make these robots for instructions, with some instructions. And after that, we should teach them programming. There is a math can help us. But there is a little problem with design, because not all students can design their own projects, it's very difficult to test design. So after studying basics of modeling, we can use, for example, Arduino to connect different parts, and it's also difficult for every student. As for me, there is a question what to do after robotics, after Lego, because they can do robots, but what will the students do after school? They can't do some useful things for society because they only play games. They can't make something with another material. And what material should we choose, of what instrument should we choose except Lego?
Right, so that's, if I can cut in there, because I think Lego is a good starting point. You could create, you could make to somebody else's plans, you could try and design your own one which you made, but it would still only be a Lego robot, and that wasn't really real enough. So the question is, how can we build on that experience to make it more real? Now, you did some things where you brought reality into the classroom in an interesting way. So why don't you pick up this idea of not just being in the classroom, but bringing stuff in from the outside world? So tell us your story.
Well, as we four are science teachers, we decided to stop at the neurotechnology, and especially on robotic hands or arms. We saw a video here, 21 seconds, of a monkey controlling a robotic arm with its brain, and this robotic arm gives the monkey a banana. So we decided, because we're teachers and we make plans, so this is a kind of a lesson plan, to show the kids this video, and they to explore what kind of people need such an arm.
Right, now, and I think if you bring those two together, you've got the Lego arm that they played around and made and programmed very simply, and they've had to use the computer to program it, and then you jump this idea that we can converge, which was what David was talking about, the neurotechnology with the robotic technology, and you could, you've got that, and then you take it over to how can we help people with disabilities, lost limbs, to do that sort of thing. So that seems to me to be a nice thing to be able to take, and you could do that with children aged 11, 12, without, would that be alright, 11, 12-year-olds?
So
11, that's right. 11 or 12-year-old children.
No,
Only high school.
this subject I think is
For older.
for older.
High school.
Not the building of a robot to understand the meaning of a robotic hand and the connection with the brain.
You think that? Yeah, you think that would be what sort of 14,
I-
16 to 18?
Yeah.
I'd like to try that with some younger kids and see what they made of it. I think, but I think you know you'd have to respect the teacher's judgment on that. You know, the interesting is if it was really successful with your 16 to 18-year-olds, you might be tempted to take it down to some 14 to 16-year-olds. I mean,
Because we wanted to ask them what this robot, what this robot hand has to have, which kind of material, what they have to do, or components to make the brain.
The
Right.
components is difficult, and this is for
But
high
that's-
school. But if it's only the design, so only what we want from this
That's the reason
hand
I
to
am
do,
explaining
it's
why
enough. It's enough.
But I've seen kits that you can buy. They're not very expensive. You can put on your head, and you can do this with 12-year-olds. They put this thing on their head, and they can control something on a computer screen. So they can use it, even though they might not necessarily understand in detail how it works. So I think you've got this tension. How much detail do you need to understand in order to understand the big picture? And there's always a tension. So, but I think those two came together well. What about your one?
It's your idea.
Don't be shy now.
It's not mine, it's ours.
You start to talk already, so
Okay.
it's a practice.
First, we have to decide what disruptive technology we use, and we choose the Internet of Things. We think that it's all around us now, but it will be in more places, much more places in a few years. And the first problem we faced was to design for what age this activity. We thought about create something we call IPET, that it's something for the children, maybe in elementary school, that can see and feed their pet from the school.
Yeah.
When using some technological dispenser at home and controlling from computers from school. But we think that this may stop in the designing and maybe in the technology and society exploring, and not in the making
Yeah,
of
I
it.
mean, I think the interesting thing is you could do that with young children as a, can you think of something that would be useful to use with the Internet of Things?
Mm-hmm.
Feeding our school guinea pig during the holidays might be something to do. But when they get older, it's not that much more difficult for them to design an app and for that app to talk to something which, a little electric motor dispenses something. You could do that with 14 and 15-year-olds. So what I like about this idea is you sow the seeds when the children are in the elementary school, and you pick it up again. So that's designing, exploring technology in society when they're 9 and 10. But by the time they're 14, they can design and make with those ideas because you've taught them some more stuff.
We think we can make it in school, not with the children, and show it someplace in 2nd and 3rd grades. They got pets in the school, and they can show them how it works in school, but not making with them.
No, I can see that. Okay. So we've done 1, 2, 3. We've got 2 more to do. So we go for this one first.
We choose the task 2.
Yep.
We decided for the synthetic biology.
Yep.
We started thinking about life. That life is controlled by evolution. that, which means that it goes from one balance to another balance. Evolution means balance, reaching different balance. So evolution goes from one balance to another natural balance. When we interfere with nature, through, for example, synthetic biology, we ask ourselves, or the kids need to ask themselves, what happened? So we took an example. Before we learned about synthetic meat, this is something that really impressed us. And we asked ourselves, it may break the natural balance. Why? This is what we would like our kids to think about. Why? Because our body is a perfect built machine. Everything is integrated, everything works. If something happens somewhere, everything breaks. So, synthetic meat, are we sure that it will not cause any break in our body, that is disease in our body? So, will it have a negative impact in the human? So, this is what I would.
All right. So you're setting up a debate about the ethics and the safety of synthetic meat. And would one of the things you'd ask the children be, how would you find out if it was safe? What experiments would you as a scientist do to explore whether this synthetic meat was going to be harmful?
That is more than experiment. If already it's used to do statistical studies and see which is the effect on some kind of in the health of the population.
I mean, it seems. Would you go straight to human subjects, or would you feed this synthetic meat to animals first?
Like every research.
I'm just thinking, but I mean, isn't this a discussion to have with the children about,
Yes.
when we've got something like this, because potentially, if we could synthesise meat, then there's no need for anybody to be a vegetarian, is there? And it could have huge implications for the World Food Programme. Maybe. I don't know. It depends, scale, distribution, all those sorts of things. So starting a debate about something like that, I think, is a really interesting way of doing it. It's not dissimilar to your starting the debate on the monkey, but it's a quite different field. So we've got debates as possible starting points. We've got starting with something we all know how to do, the Lego thing, as a starting point, which then links up with the idea of the debate. And we've got this idea that you could give kids a design challenge using these new technologies, but not actually require them to make it, because that would be too demanding at that stage. And you're the last guy. So what was your key point?
Okay, we tried to start with synthetic biology too, but we found ourselves talking about robotics. Yes, because we wanted to make an exercise of imagination with the kids, with the children, to first to imagine, give them any purpose for create a living organism. For example, helps to clean the room, their room. But that's you can do it with a robot more probably than with a living
Interesting
organism.
to try and do it with something that just ate all the bad stuff. I mean, and then it grow and get big, and would it eat you?
Like a gremlin.
Yeah.
But so the first step is to give a blank sheet and to draw what your imagination say, and then to share that drawing with a partner, and to optimize the design of that animal or plant or what they imagine. Organisms. But we have a problem, because it does the same robotic or synthetic biology.
But you've got an interesting thing there. Do we go for robots that are made of metal and stuff, the conventional robot, or do we go for synthetic biology solution, and people are talking that, you know, biology is the new engineering. That's one of the phrases that comes out of synthetic biology. What I thought was really interesting, you say you give them the blank piece of paper, maybe some stimulus and discussion, and they do the thing. And there is no right answer here. Science teachers and maths teachers are kind of used to knowing what the answer is and helping children reach that right answer. Is that fair, or is that a parody? Sometimes it's fair, right? And here you're in a situation where you don't have a right answer. It's what the child or young person comes up with. And some teachers find that an uncomfortable thing to do. I mean, I think it's a great thing to do, but it's quite different to what you normally do when you're trying to teach kids about the structure of the atom or whatever it happens to be. But this idea of a design challenge, which is not dissimilar to your design challenge too, I think is, you know, is a good one. What was the other thing that you said right when I came and saw you, when you were looking really sad?
That we need to consult with other...
Why did you need to consult?
Because we don't know everything about this topic, or...
What you actually said was not that we don't know anything, we just don't know enough. Now, you can never know everything, right? Time? Yeah, okay, I'm just about to wind it down. But, you know, you do need to know something. And one of the things you're going to have to do is find out more about this stuff. If I was doing this session again, I think what I'd do is I'd prepare an information sheet about each of these things, but I wasn't sure how much you knew, and I think that's my learning from this. But I do think one of the challenges for teachers in dealing with new technologies is there's going to be stuff to learn, isn't it? Because it's new, right? And you didn't do it in your degree, right? And part of the fun for me seems to be finding out new stuff. Let's do this very quickly. What have we got? We've done time for the tasks. Summing up, I think we've kind of done that mainly. What I would say is, when I did the last seminar here, I asked people to write about STEM in their country, and 4 people did, and their names are in this book. So I've got 2 Israeli teachers, Marcos from Argentina, and Vitor from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And my question is, you know, is there anything that you could write about that will be useful for me and you? What could you actually do back in your country to do with this? Because if you do something, I'd really like to know about it. And who else could you involve? And it could be, this is your point about the expertise, there will be research and development centres in your country about those disruptive technologies, and you could talk to some of the young researchers in those places, and they'd be, I suspect, be more than happy to come in and share what they're doing with you and the students you teach.